Kicking off at number 5, The Infected, The Last of Us. The sound of clickers will terrify you, for good reason, because whether you're Joel or Ellie, and whether you've got a poor quality crowbar or one measly arrow left in your inventory, hearing the sound of a fungal clicker or stalker lurking somewhere beyond a darkened corridor is a horror experience like no other. You see, The Infected are terrifying, and Naughty Dog's The Last of Us did a stand-up job at reinventing the whole zombie apocalypse shtick with a wholeheartedly original spin on the genre. But it not only did that, it redefined the very concept of what makes zombie horror in video games so damn terrifying. Given the right circumstances, one clicker on its own lurking behind the shadowed corner of a stairwell is far more terrifying than a horde of sprinting zombies running at you whilst you're spraying and praying to oblivion. Now, that's partially down to the fact that the resource management in this game is second to none, and part of the dread comes with knowing what infected obstacles are waiting ahead of you, with the prior knowledge that you only have 2 bullets left in your pistol and only a single health kit to boot. That's not to detract from the fact that the actual design as well as the lore behind The Infected is nightmare fuel enough, given the fact that more so than many other zombie apocalypse concepts, this one is kind of rooted in some pretty sound science. The Infected in The Last of Us are created from a spore-induced mutant outbreak called the cordyceps brain infection. Essentially, this viral infection is a rapidly aggressive fungus, and once a human is infected by its spores, 4 stages of mutation then begin. Stage 1, the runners; stage 2, the stalkers; stage 3, the aforementioned clickers; and stage 4, the bloaters, which, if you've played this game, you'll know are a different kind of fear entirely. I mean, yeah, as you progress further and further into The Last of Us, the fear that each of the infected bring gradually becomes diminished, but there's no denying the fact that the fungal infected are damn terrifying for the most part. Swinging in at number 4, Necromorphs, Dead Space. And whilst we're on the topic of mutated and partially reanimated corpses, we have to include what is essentially one of the most terrifying undead hordes in video game history, the Necromorphs, the living definition of science fiction meeting horror and ripping out your throat before anyone in space can hear you scream. If you've played the Dead Space franchise, you'll know how truly terrifying stumbling upon your first Necromorph actually is. And yeah, okay, let's get this out of the way. These guys fall in line right beside the Flood from Halo, and I mean, they're pretty much the exact same thing, as well as the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, as well as the many from System Shock. But in my opinion, the Necromorphs of Dead Space just seem to capture something special. Maybe it's the tight corridors, and maybe it's the lack of methods to combat them to begin with, but whichever flavour or texture they appear as, Necromorphs are a different kind of fear entirely. In Dead Space, how many times do you think you can walk past a seemingly dead body before it leaps up and ravages you with its terrifying Necromorph to teach you the lesson that you needed to know in order to get better at this damn game? From a lore perspective, these alien undead infected parasites are even more terrifying, and when it comes to the Brethren moons, the less you know, the better. Again, yes, the concept itself is pretty much the grave mines of Halo's Flood, but the fact that the Necromorphs are essentially a writhing mass of undead flesh whose sole purpose is to find more flesh to kill and consume and then add to the pile, which actually serves to add an even more terrifying aspect to Dead Space's gameplay. In most cases, you can't just shoot these things in the head like the Flood. You have to very carefully and very accurately shoot and slash their arms and legs off so they'll slowly stop crawling toward you, and once you think you've got that mastered, a new form of Necromorph falls from an air vent and now it's got limbs coming out of its rib cage. Yeah, Dead Space is terrifying. Next up at number 3, Mimics, Dark Souls. And whilst From Software's incredible Dark Souls series is full to the brim with a boatload of truly horrifying entities, dragons with a million maws, giant skeleton warlords that linger in the dark, and councils of kings made from pure shadow, without a doubt, when it comes to gameplay, all of them pale in comparison to the true unequivocal fear of stumbling upon a mimic. And yeah, in a few ways this entry is a little tongue-in-cheek, or tongue-in-chest should I say, but I'm really not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, because for what is essentially a treasure chest, this thing really is the most terrifying monster in all of Dark Souls. For those of you that have played Dark Souls, you'll know how damn difficult it is anyway. I've only ever played Dark Souls 3 and it took me about 4 hours to figure out how to defeat the first boss, and then once you get to Firelink Shrine and you finally think you've got a handle on things, a few hours later you're opening a chest to get some loot, and then you scream in pure terror at the sight of a disgusting giant tongue and a row of teeth munching suddenly on your corpse. You see, the Mimic is an interesting video game creature, and it's one that I was aware of for quite a while before Dark Souls, particularly in most JRPGs like Final Fantasy, where they're easy enough to defeat for the most part. Traditionally, the Mimic is an unassuming treasure chest, seemingly filled with loot, that first appeared in Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. They were put in place to keep the player players on guard. Just when you think you've got the drop and you're going to pick up some loot, obviously you trigger a monster fight instead. But there's just something about the depiction of mimics in Dark Souls that really takes the cake. Maybe it's the horrifying way they crawl across the floor, or maybe it's the fact that for 99.9% of this game you're at your wit's end and on edge anyway, or maybe it's the vile giant tongue and the thin spindly arms and legs. But yeah, mimics. Those guys. You died. Coming in at number 2, Yogg-Saron, World of Warcraft. And you might be thinking, what the hell, Jack? World of Warcraft? How the hell is this even close to being a horror game, never mind a remotely scary game? And yeah, it's not. For those of you that don't know, WoW is an MMORPG that for the most part is a relatively straightforward video game. There are no mechanics that make players panic and fear. There are no darkened corridors to stumble through. In fact, it's a number crunching game that requires the effort of upwards of 40 people to pull off, and that's probably the most stressful thing about it, trying to coordinate a raid. But when it came to one raid in particular and one final boss fight, even the mechanics of defeating Yogg-Saron were something else entirely. Obviously this is a pretty niche pick because not many people would have experienced this raid, but damn, defeating the old god Yogg-Saron in the depths of Ulduar should have been listed as a horror experience in itself, because it was terrifying. In the incredibly rich and deep lore of Warcraft, the old gods were a race of malevolent entities that were defeated thousands of years ago and imprisoned deep within the core of the planet Azeroth. One of the most powerful of them was Yogg-Saron, the beast with 1,000 maws, the monster in your nightmares, perhaps the best depiction of a Lovecraftian entity in modern entertainment. As the final boss of the Ulduar dungeon, the old god Yogg-Saron was set up to be quite a challenge. And boy was it a challenge. Like with anything in Warcraft, defeating a raid boss requires coordination of up to 20 people, in some cases 40. But during the events of this fight, Yogg-Saron would whisper to those individual players about the horrors that were lurking in their minds, whispering voices into your headphones. That's not that scary, right? But as you progress through this fight, you'd be transported individually to strange places and rooms that were familiar to you, the whispering always growing louder and louder. You'd witness conversations with other iconic characters whilst you were meant to be fighting Yogg-Saron's many tentacles and maws, but you'd become so confused as to what you were actually meant to be doing that by the end of it, all you could do is stare at a blank screen of madness with 20 other people hopelessly experiencing the same as they were lost in the many layers of the fight. Obviously, as time went on and the fight became more familiar, this fear became a moot point. If you've played WoW, you'll know that most of the endgame boss fights are pretty straightforward, but Yogg-Saron flipped the damn table, and when you first aggroed that terrifying maw of an old god, it was a video game experience like no other. It was pretty messed up. And finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, The Hymn, Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. And yeah, because our number 1 spot is reserved for a creature that is so damn terrifying in both folklore and in video game mechanics that merely catching the sight of it from out of the corner of your eye as you turn against a shadowed wall with flames licking from your torch is enough to make your hair stand on end. Now, stumbling upon The Hymn is a very specific and very brief portion of the endless sprawl of a video game that is The Witcher 3, and yet for a game that is literally populated with any and every vile creature in creation that folklore and fiction could ever possibly hope to conjure up, The Hymn stands out as its most uniquely terrifying experience. Unlike many of the monsters in The Witcher, The Hymn doesn't ever outright attack its target, but instead it exists in the shadows near its victim, feeding on the target's guilt, tormenting them to the point where its victim goes completely mad or they take their own life. Although The Hymn is only ever featured in one side quest, as well as briefly in the Hearts of Stone expansion, both encounters are equally anxiety-inducing. It's a classic horror trope, and it's one that The Witcher 3 managed to capture incredibly well with this incredibly specific creation, and personally I adore the fact that pretty much nothing is known about The Hymn. All we know is that they're a type of spectre, a race of malevolent beings that exist outside the Great Veil, and yet who can interact with our own environment through the torment of individual people. The most terrifying part of The Hymn though is that after having knowledge of what it is and what it does, you begin to see its image in every shadow. You may be walking past a villager and notice something odd about the shadow they cast. Strangely enough, it has horns, and then you might spot it against the wall as the sun's about to set. You don't know what it wants, you don't know who it's after, you just know that it's there. And that, for a video game, is the classic definition of horror. Kicking off at number 5, Dead Hand, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. I mean, what a place to start. Falling down a well and finding this guy is enough to ruin anyone's day, whether you're 8 years old playing Zelda for the first time on your cousin's N64 or a fully grown adult revisiting one of the finest games ever made. Every single time this horrifying monstrosity of cobble spawn is enough to deeply unsettle you. Why? Because the Dead Hand just doesn't belong in a game of such staggering beauty and imagination. We already have an evil. It's Ganondorf and his stupid head, so why do we have to face this guy? Well, therein lies the point. The Legend of Zelda is a game about curiosity. By the time you've encountered the Dead Hand, you've spent countless hours roaming Hyrule, and after being an adult and learning the Song of Storms, and then being a child again, obviously you return back to the things you've seen before to see if anything has changed. Eventually, you're going to end up back here. That's just the nature of the game. And then, after all that build up and work and going out of your way, you head to the bottom of the well. And what do you find? This thing. The Dead Hand, a creature so terrifying that it has no place amongst the most evil of evils in this game. A bizarre, flabby, almost tumorous mass of flesh covered in spatters of blood with two tiny spiky arms and an enormous gaping skull of a mouth and teeth. Black, dead eyes and a jaw that eats Link's head in a single chomp. I mean, the fact that it's also one of the hardest bosses in the game aside, I mean, don't let the outdated graphics fool you, because encountering the Dead Hand was an experience like no other. There's no explanation for what it is or why it's there. It drops the lens of truth in the hover boots later on in the Shadow Temple. That's all we know. Hell, even the fact that it's infinite hands that shoot up from the ground is in question. Are they the same entity? Are they a different creature entirely? Why the hell are there vile, bony, skeletal arms shooting from the ground all over Hyrule? I don't know, man. I don't think I want to know. Swinging in at number 4, The Gatherers, Amnesia, The Dark Descent. As far as first-person, story-driven survival horror goes, 2010's Amnesia, The Dark Descent is up there. And if you've seen part 1 of our top 5 scary video game playthroughs, you'll see me trying to maintain my sanity throughout, as well as my oil supply. Now, for those of you that don't know, it's a frighteningly effective display of horror, down to the fact that it's a game that gives you virtually zero tools to combat the horrors that you unearth throughout the game. All you have is an oil lamp that slowly trickles away, that you constantly have to resupply as you run the risk of stumbling around Castle Brennenburg in the pitch black darkness, where you will undoubtedly go completely insane. And if that's not already a nightmare-inducing equation, then we add in these shambling horrors. I mean, just look at them. The Gatherers, the pale, bizarre, slack-jawed, twisted creations of the secrets that linger within the bowels of Castle Brennenburg. Now, I'll try my hardest not to spoil anything, because Amnesia is very much a story-driven game, and part of unraveling the game's rich lore is pretty much the primary mechanic and vessel for the horror. The origin of the Gatherers plays a big part into why these guys are terrifying, and the truth of the matter is, you'll have to piece that together through snippets of information. Hint: don't drink the wine. Listen, this game is incredibly Lovecraftian in its approach, and it's a fantastic depiction of a classic gothic approach to story-driven horror, but the Gatherers completely stand out on their own as Amnesia's single most horrifying interactivity, because you can't do anything to combat these guys. You just have to try and hide in a wardrobe and wait for this whole thing to blow over. Actually, if you're thinking about playing Amnesia, I'd recommend just hiding in a wardrobe for the entirety of the game. Then turn it off, yeah, it's probably for the best. Next up at number 3, the Banshee, Mass Effect 3. Okay, first and foremost, the Mass Effect series is one of the finest video game series ever created. Period. And yeah, BioWare may have sold their soul to the devil of late, but there's no doubting that Commander Shepard's universe-saving tale is unrivaled. I love it, it's a great series, and the Banshees are freaking horrifying. Fact. Perhaps even more so than the Reapers themselves, but hey. It also helps to clarify this list because the term monster can be interpreted in a few ways, but as so far as humans are concerned, or aliens in this case, the act of being transformed into a monster is where we draw the line, and that's also where the Banshees become a kind of tragic tale too. If you know anything about the Mass Effect universe, this goes without saying, but essentially the game tells a tale of a universe at war against an ancient evil, the machine race of the Reapers that cleanse the galaxy of all life every 50 or so thousand years. Their grunts, essentially, sci-fi space zombies that do their bidding, are creatures known as husks, transformed humans and other sentient species. Whilst there's a few variants of this horrifying space zombie species, brutes, cannibals and ravagers to say the least, the Banshee are unrivaled in their science fiction horror. Their origin though, that's where it's really bleak, and it's also kind of sad. The Asari, a race of serene and highly respected individuals who are elegant, caring, diplomatic, incredibly capable and also potentially super powerful psychics, are one of the most important and prolific races in the game. But when the Reapers get their hands on them, they corrupt them, twisting them into the vile, incredibly powerful and highly intelligent monstrosities known as the Banshee. And we're not even talking about how difficult these things are to combat in the mechanics of the game, because they're a mini boss fight in and of themselves, constantly shrieking a bio-psychic scream as their namesake would suggest. There's also a bug that can turn them completely invisible, making it pretty much guaranteed for her to land her insta-kill grab, and then you're just kind of done for and your party descends into chaos. Yeah, Banshees. Coming in at number 2, The Witches, Left 4 Dead. Now, you know that, as I often say over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, never piss off a witch. But in this case, it's don't startle the witch. Yeah. Okay, so about those Banshees, well, they pale in comparison to these long-haired husks of flesh and horror. Do you even know how traumatic it is to hear a witch sobbing in the distance for the first time? Wait, what's that I hear? I'm playing a game about zombies trying to survive for my life alongside my brave, heroic party. Why is there something crying in the distance? Wait, what's that? What's that weird music too? Ah! A witch just one-shot me. Terrifying. For those of you that don't know, Left 4 Dead, both the first and second entries of the franchise, are a 4-player cooperative survival video game set during the aftermath of a worldwide zombie outbreak. The survivors have a relatively straightforward job. Survive, kill as many infected as you can, and make it to the chopper to get the hell out of there. Now, whilst the game itself is tense and anxiety-inducing by nature, but also fun, much like the husks of Mass Effect, there are a variety of horrifying creations to deliver the fear. The Boomer, a zombie that burps and vomits vile bile everywhere. The Hunter, a stalking monstrosity that slinks through the shadows. The Smoker, a vile creature with 6 long tongues that grab a hold of you. And the Tank, a gigantic muscle-bound zombie that does exactly what it says on the tin. And then there's the Witch, and all of them pale in comparison just by hearing her horrifying mechanics. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the possibility of stumbling upon a witch in any given map that sets her apart from the rest. Really, you have to experience it to understand the truth behind it, but just when you think you've got a handle on things, you've reset in a safe room, restocked on ammo, you've rezzed the noobs in your party, and then just as you turn a corner, you hear her, and you tread softly, and you know that it's going to be very difficult to survive. Yeah. Don't start with a witch. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Moon Presence, Bloodborne. Yes, because truth be told, we could probably make a 5-point list of pretty much every single creature that features in the fantastic action RPG Bloodborne. But if we have to pick just one, hands down, every single day, it would be the utterly nightmare-inducing potential cosmic horror, Moon Presence. And also, kind of like with our number 5 entry, Dead Hand from Legend of Zelda, you really have to go out of your way to even fight this thing, which will probably say something about the quality of your character, because even trying to execute this boss fight correctly is a glutton for punishment enough. Oh, and you'll also be near death already, given the fact that you can only fight the Moon Presence after correctly defeating one of the most impossibly challenging fights and kind of final bosses of the game, Gurman the Hunter, who is pretty much you, but instead wields a horrifying scythe that will one-shot you. If you make it through that, then there's no chance for respite, because then, if you're insane enough and you eat some umbilical cords found scattered throughout the game, yeah, don't ask, you'll then find yourself staring at a jet black moon and this Lovecraftian great old one emerging from the stars to rear its ugly head and then start spewing jet black liquid all over the screen where you just can't move and you can't heal. I mean, listen, Bloodborne is an incredibly difficult game to play, and in the grand scheme of things, Moon Presence isn't as difficult as some of the rest, but it's in the oddly specific order that you even arrived at its feet that takes the cake. The fact that this is even in the game says something about Bloodborne, and visually speaking, this thing is just disgusting. Lore-wise, there's also quite a few allusions to Moon Presence being the literal origin of the point of the game itself, the hunt, and given the fact that if you defeat this cosmic horror, the game possibly ends with you being pretty much pregnant with its seed, ushering forth a continuous cycle of great old ones, blood moons, and then eternal savage hunts. Yeah, this is our number 1. No question.
In at 5, The Devil from Cuphead. Released back in 2017, Cuphead is a classic run-and-gun action game heavily focused on boss battles. What makes this game unique is that it's inspired by cartoons of the 1930s, i.e. traditional hand-drawn cell animation, watercolor backgrounds, and original jazz recordings. Anyway, the main antagonist of Cuphead is the devil himself. Yep, that's right. The devil is the primary reason Cuphead must embark on a dangerous journey in order to keep his soul, which results in Cuphead having to confront the devil in an epic boss battle. Throughout the game, the devil watches Cuphead while he's on his journey, and during your battle against this hellish creature, he will take on multiple forms during his attacks. You have been warned. Trust no one. In at 4, Mundus. Mundus is the main antagonist and final boss in Devil May Cry, a hack-and-slash video game published by Capcom and released back in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. The game centers on Dante, a demon hunter who uses his business to seek revenge on demons after losing his brother and mother. Back to Mundus though. He is known as the Prince of Darkness and is a devil prince who ruled the demon world 2,000 years ago, overthrowing the previous ruler of the demon world and threatening the human world. During his battle with Dante, his appearance takes on the form of a gigantic living statue of an aging, muscular, bearded man with enormous feathered wings, resembling figures such as Zeus. Additionally, Mundus often appears as 3 glowing orbs, arcing with energy. He is depicted as the epitome of evil within the Devil May Cry universe. He is known no compassion and will act without regard. Essentially, this dude is straight up evil, and your battle against him will be challenging to say the least. Coming in at 3, Cyberdemon. Released back in 1993, the Doom franchise is a series of first-person shooting games, focusing on the exploits of an unnamed space marine operating under the auspices of the Union Aerospace Corporations, who fights hordes of demons as well as the undead. Now, Cyberdemon was released in the very first Doom game, and also appeared in several other games, including the Doom sequels, Doom RPG, and Wolfenstein RPG. Cyberdemon is described as being a half-unfeeling machine, half-raging horned devil. This walking nightmare has a rocket launcher for an arm and will definitely reach out and touch you. Chills. Now, in the very first Doom, Cyberdemon is the toughest boss you will come across, with 4,000 hit points, which is the equivalent of 40 direct rocket hits. That's a lot. Cyberdemon also returns in Doom 2 Hell on Earth, where he is depicted on the cover art and the title screen. Next up at number 2, Pyramid Head. First introduced back in 2001 in Silent Hill 2, Pyramid Head, also known as the Red Pyramid Thing, is a fictional character from the series and also the main antagonist, who stalks James Sunderland, the primary character, who comes to Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his dead wife. Pyramid Head ultimately represents James's wish to be punished for the death of his wife, with the game, particularly the second, utilizing psychology and symbolism. The designer of Silent Hill 2's monsters stated he created Pyramid Head because he wanted a monster with a hidden face. What makes him even more terrifying is that his head is concealed by a large triangular helmet, almost like a cone. Lacks a voice, and his appearance seems to represent the town's past as a place of execution. So, do you want to go up against this faceless demon? I certainly don't. And that says a lot. Finally, coming in at number 1, Calamity Ganon. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was released back in 2017, and is the 19th installment in the Legend of Zelda series. The game takes place after the events of Ocarina of Time and occurs in the most recent age, long after any of the previous episodes. Calamity Ganon is the main antagonist and penultimate boss of Breath of the Wild, and is found at the Hyrule Castle. According to the Zelda wiki, he is the incomplete form that Ganon assumed when he was interrupted while trying to reincarnate himself. Nightmare. He first emerged in the distant past, but was ultimately defeated by an army of mechanical guardians and 4 massive mechanical constructs called the Divine Beasts. Now, his appearance is initially that of a boar-shaped spectre made of malice and possessing an enormous mouth, tusks, and glowing yellow eyes. However, in the penultimate battle against Link, Calamity Ganon appears mindless, and it's heavily implied to be the result of his attempted resurrection. In his Dark Beast Ganon form, Calamity Ganon is bestial and driven entirely by hatred and malice. Essentially, this dude is just straight up evil, and you do not want to come across him in a dark, damp cave. It's a battle you will lose.
Coming in at number 5, I have the Wendigo from Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3 is the 4th installment of the main series Borderlands games and was released in 2019. The release was a success, and the game met a lot of people's lofty expectations. The game is a first-person shooter game where you play as a vault hunter. There's a plethora of different quests and missions in this game, and as I'm sure you're all expecting, one of them is centered around a Wendigo. The Wendigo boss is found during a mission called Horror in the Woods. Yeah, horror in the woods, guys. It's safe to say the makers of this game know that this creature is freaking scary. You find this Wendigo in a deep, creepy looking cave. The Wendigo in this game is fast and extremely talented at climbing because oftentimes it will scale the walls of the cave on all 4s. It has classic antlers jutting from its head and will often charge at the player. What's different than other adaptations of the Wendigo though, is that this thing can literally spit fire. As if scaling walls and being super fast and strong wasn't enough, the game makers decided to give this Wendigo the ability to breathe fire at you. That, on top of the fact that it's extremely hard to kill, has a skull for a face, and what looks to be muscle tendons for its body is what puts it on this list. I have it down here at number 5 though, because the graphics of Borderlands 3 aren't particularly scary, but it definitely deserves a nod. At number 4, we have the Wendigo from the video game Outriders. This is a third-person video game released earlier this year on most platforms. The premise of this game is that climate change has gotten to a place of no return, and the people of Earth have decided that they need to find another planet or they're going to die. Wow, that just got real very quickly. The player in this game takes on the role of an Outrider who is an elite soldier tasked with being sent to this new planet that the human race wants to settle on. When they're there, they find a plethora of enemies, and sure enough, one of them is a Wendigo. This game doesn't have multiple Wendigos, it only has one, and let me tell you, it looks messed the heck up. It's got like bone things jutting from its back in unnatural, unsettling directions, and it's this one disgusting slit on its face that is either its eye or its mouth. I'm not even sure. It could be both. For hands, well, it doesn't really have hands actually. Instead of those, it has one massive sword-like weapon thing jutting from its right side, and then 3 more tiny claws coming out of its left side. Basically, this adaptation of a Wendigo is a freaking nightmare, and it has evolved to an advanced killing predator machine. In the game, this thing is also a boss, and super hard for the player to kill. For starters, I obviously don't want to get eaten, but if I'm gonna get eaten, can we just make it from a normal mouth, please? Not some slit thing that might also double as an eyeball. It's gonna be a hard pass from this guy. Coming in at number 3 on this list is the Wendigos from Fallout 76. Fallout 76 is another installment in the Fallout series, which for the most part has gotten excellent reviews. Although many thought that this video game as a whole did not meet the standards of the previous Fallout games, they definitely nailed it with their adaptation of the Wendigo. The Wendigo in Fallout 76 is a very fast and strong enemy that can be found in various locations around the map. Unlike the previous 2 video games mentioned, there are multiple Wendigos that the player has to deal with. Sticking to the folklore, the purpose of this enemy is to eat the player, and if you aren't careful or properly armed, they will succeed. What is different about Fallout 76 is that these creatures have different variations to them. The Ravenous Wendigo, the Glowing Wendigo, and the Scorched Wendigo can all be found throughout this game. The designation of what type of Wendigo they are is determined by environment or where the player is in the game. The image of the Wendigo changes slightly depending on what type of subspecies it falls under. However, they all have some general characteristics. They kind of look like a bigger and stronger golem from Lord of the Rings. The difference here is that rather than want to have the one ring of power, they just want to kill you and eat your flesh. Especially the ravenous ones. I mean, it's literally in their name. They are ravenous, so I can only assume that these Wendigos are pretty hungry. Coming in at number 2 is Seeking Evil the Wendigo. Seeking Evil the Wendigo is a PC game that came out in 2017 that is very similar to the likes of Slenderman. Deep in the dark forests of North America, your character wakes up in the night left stranded for dead. As if waking up disoriented in the woods wasn't enough, well, these aren't ordinary North American forests. This is the hunting ground of the Wendigo. The main mission in this game is to survive the likes of this demonic super predator. Problem is, this thing is quick. It's really quick. Quicker than your character. Like every video game, as you progress, it gets harder and harder, meaning the Wendigo gets tougher to avoid. This video game isn't like the other video games. You can't just brute force your way through it. To get rid of the curse of the Wendigo, you have to find and light totem poles that are scattered throughout the forest. Every time you light a totem pole though, this creature from hell gets faster, stronger, and more importantly, hungrier. It's said that this game requires a lot of thinking instead of the initial run from point A to point B strategy, which is a bit of a problem for me because if I'm getting chased by one of these legendary blood fiends, I'd probably be running for my life. Number 1 on this list is the Wendigos from Until Dawn. Until Dawn is a critically acclaimed PlayStation 4 video game released in 2015. What makes this game so unique is that the player can control 8 different characters. The game utilizes a butterfly effect technique where the player may make a decision as one of the characters that can then affect all of the other characters and alter the entire story. This video game often appears on other lists of the scariest video games of all time, and for good reason. The 8 players are trapped on Blackwood Mountain and they have to survive an onslaught of Wendigos. Rather than have one demonic Wendigo, this video game goes in the direction of having multiple enemies. These Wendigos also stray from the classic image of a moose humanoid-esque creature and are humans that have just mutated into cannibalistic demons due to being possessed by the Wendigo spirit. I'm not gonna lie, the graphics of these Wendigos are very unsettling. They took what Fallout 76 did and they just went way scarier with it. The Wendigos appear as these white skinny mutated beings with extremely sharp teeth and a deep desire to eat you. What brings this video game to another level to me is just how real the story gets. Without giving too much away, one of the main Wendigos was just another character that the player gets to know and that went missing a year earlier. The image of having a family member or a friend disappear and then show up a year later looking like one of those things and trying to eat me is not a happy thought. The backstory of how the Wendigos got to this mountain is also extremely creepy. It's said that in a nearby mine, the miners got trapped and had to resort to eating one another to survive. The first of these Wendigos would have been these trapped miners from years prior who ate their friends to survive. Yeah, it gets pretty dark, guys. Remind me to never go camping again, my friends.
Coming in at number 5, we have Marauder from Doom Eternal. Considering the premise of Doom is to annihilate hordes of demons from hell, it's no surprise that one of their many petrifying monsters made this list. With a bluish-grey humanoid body that's super jacked, I might add, large horns and a skull-like head, the Marauder is absolutely nightmare-inducing. Did I mention they wear a garland of skulls on their thighs? I'm into it. These enemies were first introduced to the franchise in Doom Eternal. The game picks up where Doom from 2016 left off, with Doom Guy's mission to destroy every single demon possible to save humanity. Along the way he meets his match, the Marauder, who is considered the anti-Doom Slayer, and arguably one of the most challenging enemies in the game. The lore goes deep with the Marauder. They're a group of resurrected and corrupted Night Sentinels who sided with the alien Maker, an antagonist who plans to exterminate humanity. Aside from their intense appearance, what makes these demons so terrifying is having to go toe-to-toe with one of them. The usual spraying of bullets you do in Doom just won't work on these guys, and neither do the super weapons. Equipped with an unbreakable shield, a super shotgun, and an Argent double-bladed battle axe, you'll have to put in some serious work to kill a Marauder, especially since they can summon a spirit wolf to do their dirty work. I don't need to summon anyone to do my dirty work. I do it for myself. Coming in at number 4, we have Chara from Undertale. Okay, this one doesn't have massive horns or use a double-bladed battle axe, but it is just as scary for different reasons. It's heavily debated whether or not Chara is evil, but they refer to themselves as the demon that comes when people call its name. So Chara is evil. Spoilers ahead. To understand why Chara is a terrifying demon, you have to understand the incredible lore from Undertale. Once upon a time, monsters and humans lived together until a war broke out, with humans as the victors and monsters sealed off into the underground with a magic barrier. The only way through was combining one monster's soul and one human soul, or simply 7 human souls. One day, a human child named Chara fell down into the underground and was adopted by the king and queen of monsters, and their son Azrael. Chara devised a plan to collect human souls by killing themselves and killing their soul to Azrael. Now, as a powerful being with both souls, Azrael passed through the barrier and went to the human village, where he was met with violence and was fatally wounded. Resisting Chara's calls for him to use his new power to attack the humans, he returned to the underground to die. Enraged by the death of his son, King Asgore swore to take the souls of all humans who fell into the underground, and to break the barrier once and for all. It would take all day to fully summarize this backstory, but in short, Chara is a genocidal maniac. So now you know the origin story of the totally evil Chara. So here's what makes them a demon that you don't want to mess with. They find suffering and death amusing. During a funny conversation full of laughter with Azrael, Chara fondly recalls almost killing their adopted father, King Asgore, with a poisoned pie. Is that not a sign of a serial killer in the making? I think so. In this case, it's the unexpected that makes this demon a nightmare. The game itself seems like a perfectly pleasant one on the surface, but so much darker. Who would expect that a seemingly innocent child would enjoy death and destruction so much of both humans and monsters? Not to mention Chara's obsession with harvesting human souls is seriously disturbing. She needs some help. Coming in at number 3, we have Cyberdemon from Doom. We have Doom once again with this number. Let's face it, the series is packed with beautifully terrifying creatures like the classic Cyberdemon. They're absolute units, and described as a half-unfeeling machine, half-raging horned devil. Also referred to as the Tyrant, they're regarded as one of the most prolific monsters in video game history, having made appearances in every installment of the Doom franchise. This waking nightmare takes the flesh and metal aesthetic to the next level, having a literal rocket launcher as its arm. Not only is the cybernetic monster massive, easily towering over any human, it also has 2 huge antlers on its head. I don't know what's worse, its creepy smile with razor-sharp teeth, or its 4 orange glowing eyes. It's the teeth, definitely the teeth. In combat, he is also able to summon spikes from the ground to kill you. Scary stuff. And if you don't have a whole arsenal of ammunition, good luck taking down one of these bad boys. Like most good demons, this one goes out with a bang. If you manage to kill this hellish monster, he lets out one final roar accompanied by explosions. Cyberdemon certainly have a flair for the dramatics. Coming in at number 2 we have Titanite Demon from Dark Souls. How could we do this video and not include Dark Souls? There's a plethora of spine-chilling demons to choose from, but there's something truly terrifying about the one and only Titanite Demon. Also known as the Prowling Demon or Faceless Demon, which is scary on its own, little is actually known about these intimidating creatures, which adds to the creep factor. It's said that the death of the nameless blacksmith deity birthed these demons from Titanite slabs, explaining why they resemble statues made of black stone. They're massive and muscular with an extra long reptilian tail which can cause some decent damage. Perhaps the scariest part of these demons is the large arch that almost forms a ring in the place of an actual head. As if that wasn't enough, some appear to be missing a leg, forcing it to drag itself on the ground. That just makes them even more chilling. The Titanite Demon's weapon of choice is a catchpole, but they're also able to shoot long-range lightning bolts. Thankfully, you can avoid these mini-bosses in the game, but you'll miss out on a few valuable items they guard and the rare Titanite they drop. And finally, in at number 1 we have Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, my absolute favourite. In the top spot is the iconic bone-chilling, nightmare-inducing Pyramid Head. This humanoid monster has become synonymous with the extremely successful franchise. He isn't the most complex in design compared to others on the list, but he's damn good at freaking out even the strongest of people. The disturbing monster wears a large red triangular helmet resembling a pyramid, hence the name, and wears a white blood-soaked robe similar to that of a butcher's apron. Also similar to a butcher is the giant knife he chases you with. Pyramid Head is known as the Executioner, which makes sense because he shares a resemblance to one of the Silent Hill's most notorious individuals, Jimmy Stone. He was a priest and executioner of the town's cult who served the angel Valtiel. It's also speculated that Pyramid Head is a manifestation of guilt by the game's protagonist, James Sunderland. What makes Pyramid Head such an intimidating foe is his ability to prey on your most primal fears. He haunts the player almost like playing with his food without letting you fight back. He watches you and forces you to run from him with his giant knife. And also, if you've ever seen the Silent Hill movie, you know he's absolutely terrifying in that. He literally rips someone's skin off just with one hand. Gone.